Afternoon, Year 11. Just another quick video for you to go through question 3, which we're not very good at. Apologise as the camera's in the middle of the screen, which is not the best, but there's nowhere else to put it where it's not covering something important. And obviously there's nothing more important to have on here than my face. Right, so let's have a look at the questions. I did an interpretation to support the view that the cinema was the most important factor in the development of entertainment in America. Important to read that first. So when you read that first, you can read the interpretations and then you actually know what you're reading, or what you're reading it for, and you're looking at from the perspective of, do they support the view that cinema was the most important factor in entertainment? Okay, so if we have a look at the first one, and we've got to make a quick decision on the first one as to whether it's a yes or a no. And it says the cinema, pretty easy one, this one. This was the most glamorous aspect of the Roaring Twenties. So we can generally say yes, that does agree. Read it a little bit further because it will give some reasons. It talks about in 1929 going to the movies a national habit, 110 million people each week. Before the late 1920s, movies were silent, no only captions. And then it mentions actors, and then it mentions some film companies underneath. So it goes a number of reasons why the cinema was one of the most important factors. So that would be quite easy to use. If you look at how in fact, we'll look at that in a second, how I've structured it. Now, the second one, let's make a quick decision about that one. So it says Louis Armstrong. Now, I'm not a genius, but if it's mentioning Louis Armstrong, it's probably not talking about the cinema. So you need to read that a little bit further. Obviously, you probably work out that he's not going to support the view that cinema is the most important factor because it's talking about jazz. And we won't read on any further because you obviously see that it talks about jazz and then it mentions Louis Armstrong's voice, etc., etc. So we've got one that does, the first one, and one that doesn't. Now, so I want you to have a look at how I put this one together. So I've gone with the traditional approach, which is cap judgment. And we'll just look at how that's pieced together. Okay. Before we do is just mention quickly, the first one is from the BBC Culture website, Culture and Society website, and the second one is from a book, The Life of Louis Armstrong, by a music journalist. Okay, so some quite straightforward ones to analyse and evaluate here. So this is how I put it together. You see here, interpretation 1 supports the view, always use that. Cinema is the most important factor. It details the role of film stars, genres and movie companies, its popularity. Now, context. I've then gone over to talk about 100,000 people attended Rudolph Valentino's funeral, 300,000 cinemas, tickets were cheap, etc., etc. I've given some real reasons why cinema was really, really popular. Now, here's the important bit. So I've given a reason why. So that's the how. How does it support your interpretation? And now it's doing the why. So this interpretation from the BBC website. This would have been researched in detail with hindsight and overview in order to provide students with revision information. In this extract, it focuses on just the cinema. It's part of a far wider website. It's probably a brief part focused on popular entertainment. Also, the fact that what I haven't put in there is the fact it's a Culture and Society website. So it's therefore going to be focused on things like the cinema, because that's a big part of culture and society. Now, the second one, look at what I've written there. So again, I've gone with a classic interpretation 2, doesn't support the view, focuses on Louis Armstrong. And then I've put in there context about Louis Armstrong and about Duke Ellington, about how jazz was really, really popular. I've then evaluated the authorship. So this interpretation was taken from a music journalist whose focus is Louis Armstrong. He'd like to focus narrowly on Louis Armstrong and his impacts on jazz rather than the wider picture of the 1920s. Now, most important bit here, the conclusion. I've got to sort of pull it together and compare them both. So, in conclusion, 1 supports the view, focuses purely on cinema for the purposes of informing GCSE students. Interpretation 2 doesn't. It's by a musical journalist focusing solely on the impact of jazz and Louis Armstrong. So, if you see there, it's quite a simple judgment. It's probably not the best answer in the world. It's not going to get maximum marks, but it's definitely going to get more than 4, which is what we're aiming for.